It's such a pleasure now to invite Megan Brantley, a member of our congregation who joined now almost 2 years ago. It's been such an honor and a privilege to get to know you and to learn from you, Megan. And tonight we all have the chance to learn from you, from your journey, from your Torah, from your courage. Thank you for being here.
I'm kind of short, so I'm going to move this. Okay. I remember the panic that set in after pressing the post button on my Facebook page in December of 2010. Megan Brantley is gay. Deal with it. Only a day prior, in joint family therapy session, I had divulged this information to my parents, who accepted me, though they had lots of questions and big feelings. I was a freshman in college, had recently broken up with a long-term, for high school, boyfriend, and was questioning most things in my life. I was 20 years old and already felt like I was late in coming out, but I couldn't quiet the voices screaming in my heart and soul about who I was. Fear vacillated through my head. What will they think? They're going to be disgusted. And I wish I could change this. With sweaty hands, a racing heart, and a dropping stomach, I kept refreshing my profile to see if anyone had responded to my declaration. I remember late nights lying in bed begging and praying to a God I didn't know or believe in to change me, to make me normal, and to save me from a life of being on the margins of society. I was fortunate to have nothing but loving and affirming responses to my coming out publicly and realize how lucky I was. Though in private, I had some relatives who were less than kind and continued to be less than kind, as well as the occasional stranger in public and on social media. But this isn't just a coming out story. My Jewish identity and my queer identity have been developing in tandem for a long time. You see, I didn't grow up immersed in the Jewish community for reasons I won't go into at great length here. But let's just say it involves a very secular Jewish mom, a lapsed Catholic dad, and quite frankly, the inability to afford organized Jewish life. But that's a topic for another Shabbat. No camps, no bat mitzvah, no religious school. My Jewish journey has been an ongoing process of my own choosing from the time I was a teenager old enough to tell my mom I actually wanted to have a Seder to now at almost 33. And yes, I still do love Seders, by the way. In June 2022, I went on birthright to Israel with one of the last cohorts accepting 27 to 32-year-olds. Nervous about being accepted as an LGBTQ Jew on the trip, I worried about how others in my cohort might feel sharing a room with me. Turns out, almost half of us were some color of the rainbow. Being around other LGBTQ Jews in Israel was healing and transformative. After I returned home, I felt a call to be officially part of a formal Jewish community for the first time in my life. So I started synagogue shopping. To be honest, I was nervous entering an explicitly religious space as an out lesbian adult, worried about how and if I would be welcomed and included, because I had zero intention of going back into the closet to fit into the Jewish community. What I found instead at Har Sinai Ohab Shalom was a new, old community looking to welcome anyone who walked through the door. From the moment I met them, Rabbi Sabbath and Cantor Marcus have been nothing but gracious and not only tolerant and accepting, but embracing of me in my entirety as a Jew and a queer person. Their commitment to welcoming everyone who walks through the door and their commitment to the Jewish people, all Jewish people, here abroad and in Israel was why I chose to join. There's a difference between being tolerated and being embraced. Tolerance is the cold and awkward ride in an elevator with a stranger. Being embraced is the loving arms of someone who wants to celebrate you in your entirety. The entire world is a very narrow bridge, notes Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. In this week's Parsha, the Israelites en route to the land of Israel are called to create a census of themselves and to organize their tribes around the tabernacle to prepare for battle. They are still journeying from Mitzrayim, Egypt, to a place of safety, from enslavement to freedom. This feels particularly apt as an LGBTQ Jew this year. The world not only is a narrow bridge, but is as if it's a tightrope, a constant, delicate balance to ensure my own and my community's survival. Like my tribes are being forcefully separated and counted to prepare for battle against each other. This has become especially acute after October 7th. I've found myself feeling distance from the queer community as I learn more about the diversity of the Jewish diaspora and the history of our homeland. I've found exclusion because of my unwillingness to condemn Israel for simply existing. I see and hear and feel the anger and the confusion from the Jewish community, wondering why the queer community has become so hostile toward us. Where on college campuses, students who belong to Hillel are being barred from taking place in college LGBTQ life, or worse, being harassed, bullied off campus, if not physically assaulted. I see and I hear and I feel the pain from fellow LGBTQ Jews who've been told we're abominations, a threat to society, and the worst accusation that we're predatory groomers of children, that we must abide by our prescribed gender roles and must avoid upsetting the balance of the masculine and the feminine, that we are traitors and self-hating Jews for seeing the humanity of those in the margins of Jewish and Israeli society. And yes, this includes Palestinians, both queer and not. Being an LGBTQ Jew in America, Israel, and elsewhere in the diaspora, we're reminded daily of our lack of belonging. In many Jewish spaces, I'm too queer to be embraced. And in many LGBT spaces, I'm too Jewish and yes, too Zionist to be embraced. That our mere existence is pinkwashing, or that we don't exist, or that we must choose between these core tenets of who we are. I even find this phenomenon in my current professional role at a Jewish nonprofit, knowing a significant part of my community desperately needs to be included, and that another significant part of my community desperately wants to prevent that inclusion. To be clear, I know I'm fully accepted and embraced by my direct colleagues, but it's painful to know that there are those in the Jewish community that I love that do not and will not love me. A constant balancing act, a tightrope and a reminder that the parts of me that feel natural, whole, and good are not accepted by my respective communities. What's most frustrating about this tension is my knowledge of just how many queer Jews there are and have been throughout history, who've been significant leaders in the fight for equality of both groups. Harvey Milk, Magnus Hirschfeld, Rabbi Abby Stein, Rabbi Sandra Lawson, Emma Lazarus, Beryl Bale, and on and on. In Noam Sienna's book, A Rainbow Thread, an anthology of queer texts from the 1st century to 1969, they note, queer Jewish identity is often imagined as existing in spite of or in opposition to the world of Jewish text and tradition. Further in the text, Sienna argues that studying both ancient and modern Jewish texts from a queer lens is not meant to rewrite Jewish tradition, nor is it meant to apply contemporary values and morals to ancient peoples, or even to pretend that Judaism's always been accepting of us. Instead, it makes the point that we were there, always have been, and always will be. However, I don't only want to focus on the struggles and the pain of being a queer Jew, because there's so much joy and love that both identities bring to my life. When I think about the incredible lineages I come from, I'm truly filled with what this Shabbat and this month is about, pride. I think of my personal Jewish ancestors, my great-grandfather and his sister, who escaped Poland first to Cuba, then to Panama, then came to the US to have a better life where they and their families could be free to be proudly Jewish, and they were. I think of the ones that stayed in Nowy Dwar, just outside of Warsaw, and fought to the death in the forest as part of the resistance. I think of the strength of the family members I'll never know who hid until after the war and then went to Israel. I'm proud of the brave Jews across the diaspora and in Israel fighting to bring home the hostages and fighting for Israel to be the democratic home for all that it desires to be. I think of 1969 and the Stonewall Inn, where trans women and lesbians, primarily Black and of color, decided to fight back, tired of constant harassment and abuse by the state for who they were and who they loved, without whom pride would not be possible. I think of my gay brothers, suffering and perishing en masse of AIDS in the 80s and 90s with no help from their government, abandonment from their families, and worse, active violence and hate. I also think of my lesbian elders, who were the only ones willing to touch and comfort their dying siblings, donating blood, feeding, and caring for them in their homes and in hospital rooms. And I think of my trans and non-binary siblings, particularly young people who are under attack across our country for being who they are, who bravely protest and testify to their communities and their legislators that they are deserving and worthy of equal protection and affirming health care. In the face of such hardship and pain, being an LGBTQ Jew is also filled with so much joy and strength. My life has been enriched by being both Jewish and being part of the queer community. My community has created a beautiful tapestry of reimagined texts, songs, sermons, Judaica, art, and poetry that celebrate our dynamic identities. We've created entire synagogues full of LGBTQ Jews and their loved ones to be embraced wholly. flags and symbols to represent our hopes and aspirations for full inclusion and acceptance of each part of us. It's no coincidence that Jews have been on the forefront of fighting for the rights of many marginalized people, and it's especially no surprise that queer Jews have and continue to be overrepresented in these struggles. In the Torah, we're in the weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, traveling to a place of freedom and on a journey to becoming who we really are. And I now realize there's no race to becoming your authentic self. I've learned that the richness of Judaism and the joy of being a queer person are not actually at odds with each other. In fact, they elevate each other. I can study Talmud and Torah with a unique lens that being a lesbian grants me, and I can educate my non-Jewish queer community about the ways Jews have always been part of the struggle for our rights. When Rabbi Sabbath and Cantor Marcus invited me to write and deliver the sermon for tonight's Pride Shabbat, not only was I a bit intimidated, but I was also honored to be seen. Being seen for who I am in my entirety and not just tolerated, but celebrated, is what Pride's about. Judith Plasko writes in her foreword of Sienna's anthology, "It turns out that not only did we go out of Egypt a mixed multitude, but we have always been a mixed multitude, one that incorporates LGBTQ Jews." As one of the religious school teachers at Har Sinai Ohab Shalom, my most desperate plea to my students is to embrace the concepts of B'Tselem Elohim, that we are all created in the divine image of God, and Ahavat Yisrael, love of all your fellow Jews. I leave you with this charge. Not just in June, but every month and every day, listen and see queer Jews and all queer people. Hear our pain and the ways we've lacked belonging in our communities. Create spaces for us to be our authentic selves in your midst and to share with you the beauty of our being. Feel not just the pain, but also the joy, the love, the freedom, and the pride. Shabbat Shalom.